Hi, everyone. It's awesome to be here. Glad to have all of you with us. Glad to have Gabriel with us. I'm very excited for our chat today. And a big thank you to the Vancouver Latin American Film Festival for hosting us. And also, of course, Cineworks. Thank you for having us as well. So fantastic. In case you're wondering, for those of you who are not familiar, Peliplat is a fantastic platform where there are many places you can watch movies, but this is a space to talk about them, to have in-depth quality analysis. So with over 2 million users, Peliplat started in Latin America and is now present in North America and encouraging people to get involved with high-level discussions about movies through writing challenges. Every month there's a writing challenge that happens, and through that writing challenge you can write your own review, your own article, and you can also even put together your own lists to recommend styles and genres and types of movies that you think are going to give you a good fit, either for yourself or for other people. So that said, we're all film lovers, and no wonder we're here to talk with Gabriel. So as a fellow Brazilian Canadian to another fellow Brazilian Canadian, very happy to have you here. And I think the best way to kick this off is really just hear from you. What would you say is your two-liner introduction for you as a, don't worry about the two-liner, it can be three, it can be, but you as in, how do you like to introduce yourself, your work, and what you believe in?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. To introduce myself, my name is Gabriel Souza Nunes, Brazilian Canadian writer, director, genderqueer, filmmaker based here in Vancouver. A lot of my work is focused on folklore and magical realism, and also queer-centered stories and characters. So not exactly two lines, but something close to it. Yeah. I think that's a way to summarize my work. Yeah.
Nice. Well, and that's fantastic because I watched Passiflora last night. Congratulations. It's a beautifully shot movie and it's a beautiful story, and we're going to talk about it for sure. But you mentioned as well magical realism, and you mentioned as well, of course, your heritage as a Brazilian. So for people who are not familiar with your story, before we even dive into the movie story, but how did you get here, and how do you think that's connected to the type of content that you create? What's a little bit of previously on Gabriel Nunes?
So I moved here 6 years ago now. The first time I came here was just to visit with my family because I have a younger sister and she studied for a year in Nanaimo. So we came here to visit her host family. And then I literally put on Google film Vancouver. And then I discovered everything that happened in the city. I had no idea about all the TV shows and everything that happens with Netflix and all the other big production companies. So I just put that on Google, found a film school, booked a tour, and then one thing kind of led to another. And in June 2018, I moved here. And ever since getting here, it was this very big immigration struggle that I think a lot of the immigrant filmmakers and also any other immigrant here, they do have to go through. Happy to say that I finally have my PR. So this is definitely opening a lot of doors, which is great. But I think this section of my life of the 5 to 6 years here, while all of this was happening, really reflected into my work, in my film work. Because even though I do focus a lot in queer narratives and queer characters and queer stories, and magical realism, a lot of those topics, they show up through the lens of diaspora and diasporic experiences. So I still use those 5 to 6 years as a lot of like the main point of inspiration for a lot of my stories. Hope that answers.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it does answer a lot because I think, based on what you just said, a lot of this experience and a lot of this filmmaking creativity comes from your own story, right? The struggles you faced and from all of these different perspectives. So it's interesting when you mention that because you even mentioned like queer filmmaking, and it's interesting to see. We talked about a little bit this before when you even come here to the panel, but how would you describe Passiflora? And then we can dive a little bit into the connection of your story with the content of the film itself.
So Passiflora is this magical realism drama short film inspired by the Brazilian folklore surrounding the passion fruit. So some communities in the north and northeast of the country, they believe that you're gonna fall in love with the first person you see after eating a passion fruit. So we decided to create this whole queer coming of age story where this guy finally comes to terms with his sexuality after having a magical passion fruit drink at a club. Um, and it was a very big conscious decision to explore Brazilian folklore specifically and magical realism. A lot of people ask if Passiflora is a surreal film. It is not. It is a magical realism film, and I'm very strict about this separation because magical realism comes from all the folklore stories that I grew up listening to, and I'm very annoying about that separation. And most of the experiences that I had in my co-writer, Caroline Wooner, as well, we had growing up as queer teenagers, kind of led to what the story came to be at the very end. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's fantastic because when watching it, I mean, I remember you telling me it's a homecoming story as well, right? And there's a magical realism for sure, but I also see, and don't worry for all of you who haven't watched it yet, no spoilers, but some mentions, which means I think it's a beautiful story also of self-love, right? And that's really really cool to see how it touches on different fronts while still expressing and even expressing the Brazilian folklore. Thank you for telling me because I mean for me, passion fruit in Portuguese is maracujá, which obviously comes back to the indigenous origin and the way it's addressed, not as the passion fruit per se, but just from its original name. But I had no idea of the folklore of the legend, right? So it's really cool to see how you adapted that cultural element as a modern story and a modern story that also touches on modern issues. And it's also interesting to see you mention magical realism, how that's also something that we see recurringly even in Latin American stories, right? I mean, it's very easy to, I think the go-to example is 100 Years of Solitude. We think of magical realism, but then it's also really nice to see that being brought in this modern aspect. Um, did you always want to explore Brazilian stories or maybe this folklore aspect of it? I remember that one point you mentioned your connection with sci-fi.
Yeah.
What made you sort of transition from sci-fi to magical realism?
So, like you said, when I moved here, for some reason, I made this silent decision to water down my identity, not only as a Latino creator, but also as a queer creator. So the very first couple scripts that I was writing and the very first films that I was directing, they were very sci-fi based and only talking about like different dimensions and robots and all these crazy aspects, but not really addressing all these other topics that we're addressing right now with Passiflora. And I think during the pandemic, when I had a lot of time to think, I think I started thinking about like what is my identity as a filmmaker and what type of voice I want to have and what I want to echo with people and what I want the audience to take from my work. And I realized like, oh, I don't think I'm actually saying anything that I really want to say. I'm just echoing a perception of what I thought people wanted me to say. And then, so Passiflora is a Crazy Eights film. So if you're familiar with Crazy Eights, it's this local competition here in Vancouver where 6 shorts are made in 8 days. And I decided, you know what, this feels like a natural next step in my career to pitch for Crazy Eights. So I'm just gonna make this very conscious decision of addressing Brazilian folklore and a queer story for this very specific local competition. So it could feel like a new introduction of Gabriel to these people in a way. I mean, I don't think I'm that famous. People don't really know who I am. But if maybe, but I feel like this whole process is it's definitely a new chapter, a new beginning. So from now on, I really want to focus on magical realism, folklore, and queer centered stories for sure. Yeah.
That's fantastic because you just described the process that lots of immigrants go through, right? As in, I want to blend in with society, but to what point blending in means negating your identity, right? And I think that's fantastic in terms of, especially, I want to ask you. Of course, you mentioned the process you went through, the pandemic, and this new phase. This is fantastic, this new chapter. But do you think something changed in society as well, or was it more of a change that came from inside and it's really up to you?
I think we're still seeing these changes now. I mean, technically, we're still in a pandemic, so in a way, we're still seeing the aftermath of all of that. I think for the first couple of years after 2020, we saw a lot of personal changes, and now we're having the space to actually propose those things and really address those topics. One thing that I did notice at the beginning when I was just thinking about the story, whenever I said magical realism, if the person was not from Latin America, they had no idea what I was talking about. So I think like this open window to new voices and new topics, and even like not necessarily new genre in film, but um, this openness to like magical realism and other types of like other formats of stories. It's just something very recent, and I think probably the pandemic has something to do with it, where we're just desperately looking for more representation. So I just hope that people that grew up listening to a lot of folklore stories, they do see this film and that resonates with them a little bit. Um, yeah, and a film works in a funny way because you do something today to really see the consequences in 3 years. Um, so I think the first time that I thought about Passiflora was maybe May 2021. And then we only started writing the script in 2022 to then film in 2023, and now I'm talking about the film in 2024. So it's a long process. So hopefully this will spark something for the next 3 to 4 years, so we can see more of that. Um, yeah. Sometimes I talk a lot and I forget the point that I'm trying to make. So yeah, so if you see that I'm going somewhere else, please direct me back. I'm a director, but not in this case. Yeah, does that cover your question?